Before Adam, the mysterious creatures that ruled the earth, long before the creation of man, before the first breath of Adam, there existed a world that has been forgotten, a time when the earth was not as we know it today. The oceans were deeper, the skies were darker, and the air carried the voices of beings who walked this planet long before humanity opened its eyes. They were not angels, nor were they jinn. They were something different, something older. The story begins in a small desert town where a young archaeologist named Nabil lived. He had always been fascinated by the question that most people avoided. What existed before Adam? He had read ancient scriptures, dusty scrolls and forgotten inscriptions from civilizations that predated even the earliest known records. Every source hinted at a truth buried beneath myth, that there was once another race on this earth, a race of living beings who ruled the world before humans were even imagined. One evening, while searching through the ruins of an ancient settlement, Nabil uncovered a strange tablet. It was made of black stone, smooth and cold, and it glowed faintly when touched. The inscriptions on it were in no known language, but the symbols repeated one phrase over and over. Before Adam, the symbols seemed to pulse, as if the stone was alive. Nabil felt a deep tremor in the ground beneath his feet, and a soft humming filled the air. That night he could not sleep. He kept staring at the tablet. The next morning he took it to his mentor, Professor Rahman, a scholar who had dedicated his life to studying lost civilizations. The professor looked at the tablet for a long time, then whispered words that sent a chill down Nabil's spine. "This is not from any human hand. This was made before the age of man." The two decided to investigate the origin of the artifact. Their search led them deep into the desert, following coordinates found hidden within the markings on the tablet. The journey was harsh. Winds whipped against them and sandstorms rose without warning, yet something guided them both, as if the earth itself wanted to reveal a secret. After 3 days they reached a vast canyon carved deep into the earth. At the bottom lay ruins that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Unlike any structure Nabil had ever seen, the buildings were smooth, metallic, and untouched by time. The air felt strange, heavy, almost alive. When he stepped inside one of the ruins, he saw carvings depicting tall, luminous beings with elongated limbs and eyes that seemed to glow. They stood beside creatures that resembled dragons, serpents, and winged beasts. The carvings told a story, one of creation and destruction, one of balance and betrayal. According to the images, these beings were known as the Dahar, the keepers of the first earth. They were the caretakers of the world before mankind. The Dahar shaped rivers, grew forests, and guided the stars. They lived in harmony with the elements until something changed. The carvings showed fire, falling from the sky, oceans boiling, and the Dahar turning against one another. The final image showed a great light descending from the heavens, followed by silence, and then the appearance of a new symbol, the mark of Adam Nabil and Professor Rahman. Documented everything, but the moment they tried to take photographs, their devices failed, batteries drained, lights flickered, and an eerie whisper filled the chamber. It was not the wind. It sounded like a voice, deep and distant, repeating the same phrase over and over: "Leave the past buried." They left the canyon shaken but determined to uncover more. The professor suggested that the ruins might be connected to references in old Arabic texts about a forgotten race known as the Banul Hin, or the Hin and Bin, said to have existed before the Jinn and mankind. These creatures were powerful, intelligent, and capable of shaping matter with thought. They ruled the earth for thousands of years until they defied divine command and were destroyed that night. Nabil dreamed of a world covered in golden light. He saw towering beings walking across mountains, speaking to the sky itself. Their voices were music, and their touch made plants bloom. But then the music turned into screams. Fire covered the Land and a great wind swept away everything. When he woke, the black stone tablet beside his bed was glowing again, but now new symbols had appeared, ones he had not seen before. They formed a pattern, a map pointing to a place far from the desert. Realized this was only the beginning. The world before Adam had not only existed, it was calling out to be found again. And Nabil was no longer just an archaeologist. He was the first man in thousands of years to hear the echo of a forgotten age. The age of the Dahar. The creatures that once ruled the earth before mankind ever took its first breath. The forbidden discovery. Nabil awoke before dawn. The strange glow from the tablet still lighting the small tent around him. The desert outside was silent. Only the soft hiss of wind over the dunes broke the stillness. Professor Rahman was already awake, sitting by the dying embers of a small fire. His eyes looked distant and heavy, as if haunted by the visions from the night before. Nabil handed him the tablet. The symbols had changed again. Faint lines now connected the markings, forming a clear pattern. It was a map. Rahman studied it carefully and whispered, "This is pointing east, far beyond this desert, toward the ancient mountains of Al-Qadr. That region is forbidden even today. No one goes there because it is said to be cursed." The professor paused and looked at Nabil. "You must understand this, Nabil. Sometimes history is hidden for a reason." But Nabil's curiosity was stronger than fear. He believed that what they had found was proof of a forgotten truth. If the Dahar existed, then everything humanity knew about its origins was incomplete. They packed their supplies and set off toward Al-Qadr. The journey took 7 days. The sand gave way to rocky ground, and then to valleys where ancient trees still stood like sentinels. Their bark was black and smooth like glass, and their leaves shimmered faintly even without sunlight. The air grew cooler, and the wind carried strange sounds, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. On the 8th day they reached the foothills, where the mountains of Al-Qadr rose like dark walls against the sky. Caves and broken statues marked the landscape, many half buried in dust and stone. One statue caught Nabil's attention. It depicted a creature with a face almost human, but with elongated features and 6 eyes carved in a perfect circle around its head. The expression on its face was peaceful, yet powerful. Beneath the statue was a single word written in the same language as the tablet, Dahar. They made camp nearby and began exploring the area. Around sunset, Rahman discovered a narrow passage leading deep underground. The walls inside were smooth, not carved by nature, but shaped by intelligent hands. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until the air was thick with mist. At the end of the tunnel, they entered a massive chamber, unlike anything they had ever seen. The floor was covered in strange metallic tiles, each etched with symbols. The ceiling shimmered like liquid light, and in the center stood a massive stone pillar wrapped in glowing vines. Around the pillar were 4 massive figures, perfectly preserved, though they looked neither dead nor alive. Their skin was grayish-blue, their eyes closed, and each had markings running across their bodies that faintly glowed in rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. Rahman approached one and whispered, "It is impossible. These must be the Dahar themselves." Nabil stepped closer and placed his hand on the pillar. The instant he touched it, the chamber came alive. Light burst from the walls, symbols flared to life, and the air filled with a low humming sound. The eyes of the statues opened, glowing with pale silver light. The ground trembled and Rahman stumbled backward, shouting, "Nabil, what have you done?" The voice that followed was deep and resonant, filling every corner of the room. "You are not of our time. Why do you seek the memory of what was forbidden?" The 2 men froze. Nabil tried to speak, but his voice failed. The light around them grew brighter until they could see shapes forming in the air, images like smoke rising from the floor. They saw a world before Adam, vast cities made of stone and light rivers that glowed in colors no human had ever seen, and creatures that moved gracefully through the skies. The voice continued. We were the first keepers born of the light to shape and guard the earth. We built harmony between flame and water, air and stone. But pride grew within us. We began to see ourselves as gods, not caretakers, and so the command came from the one above that we would be removed from the balance. Our forms were sealed in silence until the appointed hour when man would walk the earth. Rahman whispered in awe, "The Banul Hind, the Dahar, they are real." The voice spoke again. Man was created not to rule, but to remember. Yet you have forgotten, and now you disturb what was meant to sleep. Suddenly the light dimmed, and one of the Dahar moved its head, slowly turning toward Nabil, its eyes fixed on him not with anger but with sorrow. You carry the mark of the Seekers, one who hungers for what cannot be held. Go now before the cycle begins again. The entire chamber began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling and the glowing vines retracted into the pillar. Rahman grabbed Nabil's arm, shouting, "We must go now." They ran through the tunnels as the ground cracked beneath them. When they finally emerged into the open air, the entrance behind them collapsed, sealing the passage forever. That night, Nabil sat in silence, staring at the stars. The professor said nothing for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Nabil, we were never meant to see that place. If what the Dahar said is true, then they fell, because of pride, and we may fall for the same reason." Nabil nodded, but his thoughts were far away. He could still hear the voice echoing in his mind, "You are not of our time." Those words haunted him because deep inside he knew something had changed. The earth no longer felt silent. It was as if the ancient keepers had awakened again, waiting for the moment when history would repeat itself. The awakening of the forgotten. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Nabil and Professor Rahman had left the mountains behind, but neither could escape the weight of what they had seen. The voice of the Dahar echoed in their minds, and the glow of the tablet returned brighter than before. Its surface no longer showed a map, but a series of moving symbols shifting and rearranging themselves as if alive. Nabil could not look away. Every time he blinked, the patterns changed, forming shapes that felt familiar, as though trying to speak to him. When they returned to the nearest town, Rahman insisted on hiding the artifact. He feared what might happen if others found it. They stayed in a small abandoned house on the edge of the desert, where the wind howled through broken windows. Rahman spent the night translating old manuscripts, while Nabil studied the tablet. The professor found references to a prophecy hidden in ancient Sumerian texts. It spoke of the keepers who would awaken when mankind once again touched what was forbidden. The prophecy ended with a warning. When the earth remembers its first masters, the sky will tremble at midnight. Nabil heard whispers in the wind. It sounded like chanting. He stepped outside and saw faint lights moving along the horizon, not like torches or vehicles, but drifting orbs of soft blue light that glided across the sand. The air grew colder, and a strange calm filled the night. Then the tablet began to hum again. The sound resonated deep within his chest. He fell to his knees, clutching it as images flashed before his eyes. He saw the world as it had been before, vast plains of glowing vegetation, mountains that floated above rivers of mist, and cities of light where beings walked in. Peace. The Dahar ruled with wisdom and harmony until envy and pride tore them apart. Fire fell from the heavens, seas rose in fury, and a great storm erased their memory from the earth. But one thing survived, a promise that their knowledge would one day return through the hands of a seeker. Nabil awoke hours later, drenched in sweat. The professor was shaking him, shouting his name. The tablet had gone dark, but the air inside the house was thick with energy. Every object seemed to vibrate slightly, as if touched by unseen hands. Then, without warning, the tablet cracked. A line of pure white light burst from its center and projected symbols onto the wall. The markings formed a circle around a single word. Gilal Rahman gasped. That is the ancient city of the first sun. It was believed to have been destroyed before the age of man. He looked at Nabil with fear and wonder. It lies beneath the valley of stones. Despite the professor's hesitation, Nabil was determined to find it. He felt that his purpose was no longer discovery, but destiny. The next morning they gathered supplies and set out toward the valley, guided by the coordinates hidden in the symbols. Days passed as they crossed barren lands until they reached a vast expanse of grey. Rock-cracked and lifeless, the air shimmered with heat, yet there was no sun above, only a dull white haze. At the center of the valley stood a circle of enormous stones. Each was covered in carvings depicting the Dahar in their final days. Around the stones lay skeletons of strange creatures, some massive, some small, all fossilized in positions of struggle. As Nabil walked among them, he felt a vibration under his feet. The ground pulsed softly like a heartbeat. The closer he moved to the center, the stronger it became. Rahman shouted something, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. Nabil knelt and placed his hand on the ground. Instantly, the stones began to glow. The carvings shimmered, and the air filled with a deep, resonant hum. The earth trembled and dust rose in spirals. The valley floor cracked open, revealing a stairway descending into darkness. Nabil turned to Rahman, but before the professor could speak, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into the opening, and darkness swallowed him whole. The fall seemed endless until he landed on a smooth surface. The air was cold and smelled of metal. Dim light flickered above, revealing vast corridors lined with enormous statues. The walls were covered in the same ancient script. The city of Gilal had not been destroyed. It was buried. Rahman's voice echoed faintly from above, but soon faded. Nabil began to walk, guided by faint lights that ignited as he passed. At the end of the corridor stood a large circular door. Its surface was etched with the image of the Dahar, offering a glowing orb to the sky. He placed his hand upon it, and the metal shifted, sliding open with a deep groan. Beyond it lay a vast chamber filled with structures of crystal and light suspended in mid-air. The center was a colossal throne, carved from a single piece of obsidian. A figure sat upon it, tall and motionless. Its skin was pale silver, its eyes closed, and its hands rested upon its knees. As Nabil approached, the figure stirred. The chamber filled. With a low, harmonious sound, the eyes of the being opened, revealing orbs of pure light. "You have come at last," said the voice, echoing inside Nabil's mind. "The seal is broken. The age of silence ends." Nabil fell to his knees, unable to speak. The being rose and stepped down from the throne towering above him. "I am Azal, the last of the Dahar. We were the keepers of the first earth. We shaped your world long before your kind breathed its first air. You have awoken what was meant to sleep." Nabil whispered. "Why was it hidden? Why were you sealed away?" Azal's gaze seemed to pierce through him. "Because power without humility brings ruin. We became gods in our own eyes, and the balance was lost. We were bound beneath the earth until man would rise to restore what we destroyed. But man, too, has forgotten the purpose of his creation. The cycle repeats always." The chamber began to tremble again, and pillars of light rose around them. Azal raised his hand, and the light froze in place. He looked down at Nabil. "Remember this, seeker. The earth remembers everything. What sleeps beneath it only waits. Before Nabil could respond, the light engulfed him and the world around him dissolved. When he opened his eyes, he was lying back in the valley. Rahman stood beside him, shouting in relief. The crack in the ground had sealed shut, and the stones were silent again. But Nabil knew the silence would not last. The Daha had awakened, and their memory had returned to the world, the return of the first light. When Nabil and Professor Rahman returned from the Valley of Stones, the world no longer looked the same. The colors of the desert seemed sharper, the wind carried strange whispers, and even the night sky appeared brighter. The professor tried to convince himself that what they had witnessed was only a dream caused by exhaustion and fear, but Nabil knew it was real. The memory of Azal's glowing eyes and the sound of that deep, ancient voice echoed in his mind like a calling that refused to fade for days. Nabil stayed silent, haunted by visions that came in flashes whenever he closed his eyes. He saw mountains rising from the seas, trees that shone with light, and creatures of energy moving through rivers of glass. He saw the Daha walking among them, their voices shaping the world. Their presence was not evil, but purposeful. They were builders and guardians. Yet he also saw their fall, the sky burning, the earth cracking, and the Daha sinking into the darkness beneath the world, sealing their own. Wait until the time of awakening, the professor grew worried. He watched Nabil grow restless, barely sleeping, barely eating. His eyes seemed to glow faintly in dim light, as if something ancient had touched his soul. One night, while studying the broken tablet, Rahman discovered something new hidden in its surface. When exposed to fire, faint inscriptions appeared, revealing a prophecy written in the oldest script he had ever seen. It read, "The seeker will awaken the first light, and the world will remember what it was before." The breath of Adam. Rahman looked at Nabil in fear. "You must destroy this, Nabil. If this prophecy is true, you will bring back what was buried for a reason. The balance could collapse." Nabil shook his head. "The truth cannot remain hidden forever. The Daha were not monsters. They were teachers. We forgot them because we feared their power. Maybe their return is not an ending but a beginning." That night Nabil left without a word. He followed the stars, guided by something he did not understand. The wind seemed to lead him across the desert until he reached the edge of an ancient sea, now dried and cracked. He stopped at a circle of stones half buried in the sand. The air shimmered, and a soft hum rose from the ground. The stones glowed faintly, forming a path of light that led toward the horizon. As he stepped onto the first stone, visions flooded his mind. He saw Azal standing in the city of Gilal, his hands raised to the sky. The light above him split into three great streams that poured into the earth, forming the rivers of creation. The voice of Azal echoed within Nabil's thoughts. "You have been chosen to witness the memory of the world." The light around him grew so bright that the desert disappeared. When his vision cleared, he stood in a place that felt timeless. The sky was golden, the air warm and alive. The ground beneath his feet pulsed softly like a heartbeat. In the distance, towers of crystal reached toward the heavens, and rivers of light flowed like molten glass. The Daha walked among them, tall, radiant beings, with eyes of flame and gentle faces. They spoke in tones that vibrated through the soul, not as sound, but as feeling. Nabil watched as the peace of that world slowly began to fracture. A shadow rose among them, one of their own, who desired to rule rather than serve. He spoke of dominion and power, and many followed him. The harmony that once sustained the world broke apart. Fire fell from the heavens, seas boiled, mountains collapsed, and the cities of light turned to dust. In the chaos, the faithful among the Daha sealed themselves beneath the earth, vowing to return. Only when mankind was ready to remember, Azal's voice came again. The time of remembrance is near. The earth has cried for balance, and the seekers have heard its call. The first light must rise once more. Nabil felt his body lifting weightless as beams of light surrounded him. They entered his chest and filled him with warmth and pain all at once. When the light faded, he found himself back in the desert, kneeling beside the circle of stones. The dawn had broken, and the first rays of sunlight touched the sand. But where the stones had been now stood a single crystal spire, glowing faintly beneath the sun. Nabil touched it and felt a pulse echo through the ground. The wind carried a sound like a song rising from deep within the earth. Realized it was not just a vision. The awakening had begun. When he returned to Professor Rahman, the old man could see the change in him. The air around Nabil felt alive, and the faint glow in his eyes had grown stronger. The professor whispered, "What did you do?" Nabil looked toward the horizon and said, "I did not bring them back. I only reminded the earth that it remembers." Over the following months, strange events began to occur across the world. Earthquakes revealed ancient structures long buried. Beneath mountains and oceans, lights were seen rising from the ground in deserts and jungles. People from distant lands reported hearing voices in the wind, speaking in unknown tongues. Governments sent expeditions, but none could explain what they found. The scholars called it a global anomaly, but Nabil knew it was the earth awakening from its long slumber. The day came when the sun rose brighter than ever before. The air shimmered with golden mist, and for a brief moment, the world felt still, as if listening. Then from every corner of the earth came a deep, harmonious sound, the same hum that had filled the chamber of the Dahar. It resonated through mountains and seas, through every living thing. Nabil stood beneath the sky, tears in his eyes as he whispered, "The first light has returned." The glow faded slowly, leaving behind a world that seemed renewed. The skies were clearer, the rivers brighter, and the soil richer. The balance had begun to heal. Humanity had been given a second chance to live in harmony with creation, just as the Dahar once did. Professor Rahman passed away soon after leaving Nabil alone to carry the truth of what had happened. Yet he felt no sadness, only peace. He understood now that the story of the Dahar was not just history. It was a lesson, a reminder that creation itself is sacred, and that pride brings ruin, but remembrance brings life. As he walked across the glowing sands of dawn, Nabil whispered to the wind, "The earth remembers, and so do I." The voice of Bazal echoed softly in reply, and the cycle continues until all light returns to its source.